Hey guys, Greg Atkinson here with Bob Goff, New York Times bestselling author. For anybody that knows me, you know I'm a reader and I love reading books. And one of my writing heroes is Bob Goff. And so, Bob, we are so thrilled to have you be a part of the First Impressions Conference 2020. Welcome.
Oh, thanks a million. Great to be with all of you. And hi, everybody who's watching. I hope what we'll talk about is a couple things that will move the needle in somebody's life.
Yes, that is the prayer. So we are recording this and coming up on the fall of 2020, and there's no lie, no secret that 2020 has been a very difficult year. And with COVID and all that's going on in our world and our country, and we have people tuning in from several countries around the world. But I wanted to ask you, just starting out, something that I talk about a lot when it comes to first impressions and guest services and hospitality is loving our neighbor. And so in this COVID season, in the year 2020, how can we best love our neighbor?
Yeah, what a great question. And I love it's not lost on me that this question was the question that a lawyer like me posed to Jesus. He said, what's the big commandment? He said, love God with your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I think he said them together because they are like connected at the hip. And so what I try to do is just love people without an agenda. Now, I have an agenda for me. I just don't have an agenda for the people that I'm loving, because you can see that a mile away. It will be something you telegraph with the car you drive, the shirt you wear, the hat you wear, whatever it is, you're telegraphing something. And so I'd say this idea of a first impression is to just be mindful of that. I wear a Red Sox hat. I do that, Greg, because my neighbor who passed away went to heaven. She was a Red Sox fan. And before she left, I told her, I'll wear your hat for the rest of my life and represent the Sox here on earth. But in exchange, every time Jesus walks by you, you need to mention my name. I'm keeping on my end of the deal. I don't know if she is. We'll find out. But when I go through New York, people hiss at me because they're evidently rooting for the Yankees. And if they knew I was wearing my neighbor's hat and she was dead, they would feel really bad. And it's just a reminder when we greet people in this first impression that we don't know what's going on underneath their hat. But what we do have some agency over is knowing on what's going on underneath my hat. And so what I'm back to again, I got an agenda for me. I want to keep my eyes fixed on Jesus. I want to love the people in front of me that are a little prickly. And I just, the world, have you noticed it's filled with difficult people? Yeah. Here's the crazy part, people. You're one of them. You are not as lovely as you think you are. You're a little bit difficult around the edges. I know I am. Sweet Maria Goff reminds me of that every once in a while. And so knowing that what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend love without an agenda, and that what we'll do, and it's really guided by Matthew 16, this big Simon Peter moment. Who do you say I am? And some say a teacher and a prophet. And then Simon Peter says, you're God. And he said two things. Don't tell anybody, which kind of blows the minds of all the evangelicals. I think the idea is to show people, don't tell people. That's the first impression. And then the second thing, he followed in the next verse. He said, flesh and blood doesn't reveal these things to you, but the Spirit of God. And so, folks, the pressure is off. The Spirit of God is going to do whatever the Spirit of God is going to do in people's lives. What we need to do is show up ready, palms up, just say, man, I'm just here without an agenda for you, but I got a big agenda for me. And here's the agenda. Love people without an agenda, even the difficult ones, starting with me. Because you can't love them if you don't love you. And I'm not saying we need to give ourselves a big hug, but it wouldn't hurt. But to actually know who's underneath your hat and figure out what it is that is making you do the thing that you're doing. Haven't you noticed, Greg, that people are ricocheting off each other these days a lot?
Yes.
One word, one phrase, one something, and people just lose their minds. And I think it's just because everybody's on edge. And we're all insecure. This crazy thing is people know me as like a balloon guy and like whatever, but I'm really insecure. Isn't that crazy? What I've learned about myself is the more insecure I get, the funnier I get. And so like if I'm like in a really insecure setting, I'd be like, I will just start being the funniest guy ever. And what I need to do is get in touch with that little kid underneath the hat and say, dude, just settle down. Jesus has got this. You don't need to be funny. You don't need to be insecure. But it just takes a little bit of work on our part. A beautiful saying that we can only take people as far as we've gone ourselves. And so I want to go really far. And so as leaders in your community, leaders in your faith communities, I just want you to go a mile deep and figure out what's the thing behind the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And, as a first impressions person, the angle that I've always taken in my writing and my speaking and my consulting is hospitality, that hospitality is a biblical mandate, and that we are called to welcome the stranger and to love our neighbor. And so I really resonated. I was rereading this, Love Does, which a lot of people may be what they know you from, because it just makes such a big splash. And I was rereading in preparation for today your second book, Everybody Always, and there's a story in there that I want to ask you about. You get a lot of phone calls. If people don't know this, you have your number in the back of your books, and so you get a lot of calls. I think you said when we were just setting up the Zoom video, you had already had 3 phone calls come in, and so. You got a phone call from a prison and you tell a story of an inmate that called you. And this is a quote from page 155 in Everybody Always. You said, Jesus doesn't need our help with the hungry or thirsty or sick or strange or naked or people in jails. I know this because I asked him. He wants our hearts. And so how do we stay connected to the heart of God as we serve people, as we serve in ministry, as we serve our community? How do we stay connected to the heart of God if he wants our hearts?
Yeah, the first thing that I thought of under this heading of hospitality and how we deal in a faith community is to read the room. To really be self-aware enough to understand what's going on around you. I'm a pilot, and so there's a concept they give you from the day one of being situationally aware, like know what's going on in the cockpit, know what's going on outside the cockpit, but don't be distracted by what's going on outside the cockpit. And so that when we had this horrible tragedy with a helicopter crash not long ago, it was a very experienced pilot who got confused about what was going on outside the cockpit, so he didn't fly the instruments anymore. He got confused about what was going on inside the contract, and there was tragedy. And I think that can happen in our faith communities, that we get distracted. Here's the deal. I don't see Satan around every corner, but if I was darkness, I wouldn't want to destroy people. I'd want to distract them. And so what we'll do is we'll get distracted by all kinds of things. I wrote a book and I made some joke, and then somebody took great offense at whatever the joke was. And so I just thought, for them, that is a really important thing, and be like, I get it, I guess. But I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about 1 million people starving in Yemen right now. That's the number one thing. That's not a more noble thing. It's just a different thing. And so one of the things that happens is we start thinking that God is up to the same thing in your life, Greg, that he's up to in my life. And the fact is he's up to different stuff. And you're working on my marriage. He's working on your friendship. He's working with this other person's, fill in the blank here. And to just chill out. The way that we get there, it's Philippians 2:20. And it's Paul talking about Timothy. And he says, I don't have anybody like Timothy. He's a guy who takes a genuine interest in the people around him. And so I think the way that we get under someone else's hat is to take a genuine interest, not an agenda, that people aren't projects. People are people. Jesus doesn't need you to lead them to Jesus. Jesus will lead them to Jesus. So what we need to do is just take a genuine interest and care more about their stuff. If I showed you all my vacation pictures, I said, like I went to Hawaii one time, I started scrolling through all the pictures. You'd be polite, but you'd be thinking like, whatever. That's what it's like when we make it all about us. But when we say, what was the most meaningful thing that happened to you? And to really take a genuine interest, not like you're going to try to close the deal for Jesus. Be like, just take an interest and you're going to find out all these mind-blowing things. Because the crazy thing, nobody's asked them that in a whole year. And to just say, take a note. You know what I always have handy? A pen and paper. When you and I are talking, I'm writing. I want to remember these things. I want to write it down. It's right out of Deuteronomy 5 to remember the things that God is doing. It's just another way of saying, take a genuine interest.
Yeah, that's good. And yeah, that's important for us in ministry, because ministry is people. And so to have a genuine interest in others, in people. One of the things we talked about last year at the First Impressions Conference, our theme last year was the hospitality culture. So I wanted to hear any thoughts you have, since we didn't get to talk to you last year, any thoughts you have on the subject of hospitality, and maybe even just practical ways here in 2020 that we can practice hospitality and show our love for people we come in contact with.
Yeah, I think a couple things spring to mind. One of them is a derivation of this idea of reading the room. It's to take a genuine interest in them and give them what they need to fight the fights they're in. There's a really interesting story, and the reason I tell stories, it was Matthew 13. It said Jesus never spoke to anybody without telling them a story. And I know why, because we can remember stories. But there was a woman who was working in World War II to keep all the ammunition dry. And so they would wrap the ammo cases in paper, dip it in wax, and then send it over to the battles. But the soldiers couldn't get at it, like with the wax and the paper and all that. She had 2 boys that were in the military. And so she created this thing that would help them get at their ammo easier to fight the fights they were in. You know what her boss at Johnson & Johnson said? That's a stupid idea. It'll never work. But she had 2 sons. She had some skin in the game. And so she sent this invention to the president of the United States. He sent it to the Pentagon. That was how duct tape was invented. I'm not kidding you. It was a woman who knew why she was doing what she was doing. She had some skin in the game. She wanted people to have what they needed to fight the fights they were in. That's a long way of saying good hospitality. So just people, sometimes what they need is just a smile from you. Sometimes people don't get off on just a smile. Just say, hey, listen, do you have a couple minutes? That's why God made Starbucks, so you could buy them Starbucks. I know it costs too much. Buy it anyway. And one of the things that will happen if you said, let's do 3 minutes of absolute authenticity. So here, I'll lead. Greg, I am known as a guy that's just all over the place and super upbeat. But when I get away from my wife, even for a night or two, I get super, super lonely. I mean, like just sad, lonely, not depressed, but just achy, lonely. And so when I then arrive at somewhere, they're expecting me that I'll be the balloon guy. And I am, but I actually, that is a caricature of who I am. And we are many things, but I get lonely. And so what I do is wherever I am, I fly home to be with my wife, even for a few hours, so that I can get on a plane and go, because I just don't want to sit in a hotel room feeling lonely. Now your turn. What I want you to do, leaders, is to take 3 minutes of authenticity. You lead. And then say, the only rules are don't try to fix me. Don't say that's not true. Just say, lay it on me. And then honor that time by giving them 3 minutes of authenticity back. And there's something beautiful that happens. People will say that would be one of the only conversations they had that year. And you just talked about 6 minutes out of a year full of minutes. And I think there's something about that kind of intentionality to kind of read the room, that people want to be engaged, yet other people have some barriers. They would just be like, no, I don't want to go really deep right now, be kind, be humble about that, and just chill out. Maybe ask them another time. But what I want to do, since we're talking about my vacation, I went snorkeling. And I looked down at all the fish, and that's terrific. But I don't want to snorkel in relationships anymore. I want to be a scuba diver. I want to find where the treasure is. And you're not going to get there by staying in the top 10 inches. And so one of the things to keep in mind, loving people without an agenda, reading the room, going a little bit deeper, leading with love, being authentic. And there's something beautiful like that. That'll be one of the standout conversations for the year.
That's awesome. And I hope maybe, in between each session of this conference, we have a countdown and we have a break where you can discuss with your team, and maybe you guys can break up and talk about what he just proposed to you. It's so good. I want to kind of, as we're coming down the home stretch, I want to read a quote from your brand new book, Dream Big. If people have not checked this out yet, I highly encourage them to. This has been a long time coming. You've got a podcast, you have gatherings. People have been waiting for this book to come out for a while, but you have this story in the very beginning, and I would love to unpack just a little bit of it. You talked about your high school yearbook. Several people, not just one, but several people wrote the quote, "Never change." And you said it was the worst advice you'd ever received. And you said we're supposed to change constantly into kinder, humbler, more faithful versions of our old selves. Unpack that for us, is because we're all a work in progress, whether we lead a congregation of hundreds of people or thousands of people. At the end of the day, we're Christ followers, and we're humans, and we're people that are dealing with our old selves and trying to crucify our old selves. And so how do we become kinder, humbler, more faithful versions?
Yeah, great question. One of the things we need to do is just figure out what's in the way. You got to understand, you got to see what the problem was, so that you can understand the problem, so you can fix the problem. So instead of figuring everybody else out, what if you spend a little time underneath your hat and say, what were the things that went down in your life? I'm not saying get wrapped around the axle with introspection, but to say what happened, what made little Bobby Goff insecure, what made him lonely, so that you can understand that, so that you can then deal with that in a really healthy, positive way. And some of us are okay with change, but we're not okay with growth. So there's a big difference between the two. I could change my shirt, but I wouldn't have grown. If I pounded a couple Pop-Tarts, I would have grown and changed my shirts. But what I'm trying to do in everything is grow. To say, how can I do that? And that means to do some scary stuff. And it's hard. If you're listening and you're feeling a little stuck, man, it's hard. I'm going to tell you what happened last week. My son and I flew over to the desert, which is actually a stupid idea because it's hotter than the surface of the sun over there. I don't know why we didn't pick something else. But we landed, it's 120 degrees. It was so hot that the fuel in the lines vaporized. Do you know the first indication that the fuel in your line has vaporized on an airplane? The engine stops. We were now a glider. Well, the way that you get out of vapor lock is you let the plane cool down. And some of you, this is a bit of an intervention, you're going Mach 5, your hair's on fire. Could you chill out? Buy a puppy. You just need to slow down. And we think that we're just helping Jesus by doing all this crazy amount of hours and stuff. And he just wants you to enjoy him. The Song of Songs. My beloved is mine and I am his. Could you just rest in there? Here, take a breath. We're not going to do yoga. We're not going to burn incense. Just take a breath. Does that feel good? Could you just chill out and do one of those? Have a Tic Tac first if you need it, but just chill out. And then what you do to get out of vapor lock, you run up that engine. And so once the engine cooled down, we ran it back up and we got all the bubbles in the line. Man, bring this stuff to Jesus. Go down and figure out what was the crime scene, the chalk outline that was your hopes, your ambition, the relationship that failed, the whatever it is, understand it. And then say with a lot of humility, like 1 Corinthians 1:3-5 talks about how God comforts us in our troubles so we can turn around and comfort other people. That's just another version of Paul nailing what modern psychology more than suggests. You can only take people as far as you've gone to yourself. And so do some of that, but you got to take a breath to get there. Just hear one. I do that all the time now. I'm not hyperventilating. What I'm trying to do is just chill out so I can be fully present. There's a saying in the South, be where your feet are. Have you heard that before, Greg?
I have. I'm in the
I
South.
love that. Just be where your feet are. A bunch of the people I know in ministry, because I'm one of them, are not where their feet are. We're here, but we're actually thinking about this, and we got one of these things going all the time. This is not the first time an apple will do us in. But to say, well, just be where your feet are, be fully present for that conversation for 3 minutes at a time. Exercise that muscle and see what will happen. I'm telling you, people will feel like they didn't meet you. They'll feel like they met Jesus himself.
Awesome. Well, Bob, thank you so much for pouring into our attendees. This year's theme is navigating a new season, and we came up with this after COVID had come out and was on the scene, and it was just everywhere and everybody was aware of COVID. We decided to change this year's theme to navigating a new season. A lot of times you hear people throw around the term new normal or next normal, but we were thinking about biblically and in the life of a believer, it's a season, it's a new season, it's a new season of life and a new season of ministry for these people that lead churches. And so you've written about love and being present with people and kindness and dreaming big. And you even have a devotional, which I try to read in the mornings on grace and love. But if you would just leave us with a couple thoughts as these church leaders in various positions and roles, and even volunteers that serve at churches that are watching this, as they navigate a new season, what is some words of wisdom that you can leave us with?
Oh, I got one for you. Forget new normal and this normal and that normal. I want you to be abnormal. Because that will be what Jesus talked about. That following Jesus means a life of being constantly misunderstood. You won't even understand yourself because you're being this new creation. You're not snorkeling anymore. You're going deep. And I'm telling you, man, it involves some risk. But that's what love is. It's sacrifice and commitment. And if we can keep in mind why we're doing what we're doing, not just reacting to all my insecurities, not ricocheting off of everybody else's, not having an agenda for them, but having an agenda for me. I want to de-escalate all the anxiety in the room. You just read the room, you see everybody's on edge. And that's just the idea of, somebody asked me if I was watering down the gospel. And I said, oh, I hope so. I want to make it for thirsty people. I'm telling you, make the gospel available for everybody. You can speak truth and wisdom, and you can do it in a really normal way. You can just talk about, Jesus pointed to two sheep and said, it's like when one of those gets away and everybody's like, oh, I hate that when that happens. So take an interest in them. Say what sheep got away. Flip it. Say what sheep stayed. Which one's been hard for you? Disclose for yourself. This has been what's been hard for me. I want to be a scuba diver and I find myself in the top foot because it's a little warmer up there. But what I'm trying to do is do the buddy system in diving. Let's dive deep together. And what I'll do is I'll lead. And there's something beautiful when we know why we're doing what we're doing. Then it's like you've found all the cheat codes. If your eyes are fixed on Jesus, you know you're prone to wander, but your eyes are fixed on Jesus. You say like, what I'm going to do is get back to a really humble version of me. Then I think we're going to make the room where we can see Jesus not just changing us, but growing us. And that's what I hope to see. And growth is going to be hard. It doesn't need to leave bruises. It can leave a couple stretch marks. It can say like, this was a really difficult season. And we don't need to bruise other people while they're doing it. A lot of people are hip to the verse in First Peter that talks about being ready to make a defense for the hope that's within you. And then they forget the second half. It's like, keep reading, but do it with kindness and respect. And so that's what I would leave you with, is you meet people to just everything with kindness and respect. And when somebody's flat wrong, they just could not be more wrong, you don't need to be an umpire calling balls and strikes on that. Be a base coach. Tell them to keep running, or I'd stay where you are. I'd take a couple steps backwards, but don't be calling balls and strikes. Jesus doesn't need that. He needs humble men and women who have their eyes fixed on him, that know the truth and the power of the gospel of Christ. They actually understand this. Galatians 1, if even an angel of heaven comes down and preaches a different gospel, like, run out of that room. But we got to get back in touch with the first one, the one that just said, man, grace draws a circle around everybody and says they're invited. So you guys, if I can ever be helpful to you as you're doing the hard lifting of leading people with love, you give a shout. You know, if you phone, I will answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bob.
Thanks a million.